Salam, I am your host, Aya Shabi, and you are listening to I Am Nala podcast. Welcome to another episode of I Am Nala podcast. We've been a bit on a break after NalaFem Summit. You can visit nalafem.org to know more about our annual biggest event of the year. And we'll also discuss with my guest today, who is a superstar and who gave a speech at the summit to talk more about it. My guest today is an anti-racism activist, best-selling author, international speaker, and CEO and founder of Dare to Change, Zulekha Patel. Hi, Zulekha. How are you?
Hi, Aya. How are you?
I'm great. When I met you the first time, I told you Zulekha is an Arabic name. Do you want to share with us what does it mean?
Yes, it is. It's a Muslim Arabic name from chapter 12 of the Quran. I was named by my dad. My dad is Muslim of Indian heritage, and he gave me the name because I am the only daughter he has. So he wanted to give me a name that stands out and that would set the tone of my path. And so in the Quran, Zulekha, the wife of Aziz, who was the Pharaoh, she was someone who was in control of her destiny, charted her own path. She stood out as one of those women who decided to hop out the box that was built for her by the men around her. And the meaning of the name is very closely tied to how they described Zulekha. Zulekha was a woman of beauty, influence, and power in the Quran, and it means brilliant beauty.
You definitely embody all of your name. So in 3 words, Zulekha, tell us who you are.
If I had to use 3 words to tell anyone who I am, this is so weird. Firstly, I would say that everything I do in every facet of my life is very closely tied to how I want to remind people, to show people that they're loved. So I'm a lover in just every facet of my life. The work that I do is me showing love personified, my love for the continent, my love for people, my love for human rights. That's at the center of my work. So I'm a lover. I'm at times I do have just a little sprinkle of feistiness, just a sprinkle. Just a sprinkle. And I think the 3rd word would have to be I'm a sister, because in all the roles that I've played in my life, I think being a sister, whether showing up in the lives of the women in my life as a friend and how I show up as a sister to my actual sisters, I think that that's like the role I enjoy most, and showing up for the women around me, because the women around me have set the bar very high in terms of how they've treated me, how they've shown me love, and the love that I've felt from the women around me has inspired me to also show a certain high level of love to the women that are in my life. So I'm also a sister, and it's one of my favorite roles.
A feisty lover sister. I love it. So the way I came across your work actually was through your book, and it's a children's book, and we will come to talk about your activism in a bit. But I want to know more about your own childhood. Tell us a little bit about that and your family.
I grew up in Pretoria, born and raised in Pretoria in South Africa. My background in terms of cultural heritage, my dad immigrated to South Africa in the early 70s. He is from India, in Karmad. He's Muslim and Indian. My mother is a Black African woman. She is Ndebele. Growing up, I think that one of the things that stood out for me when I was growing up, which is something that is entrenched in everything I do, is the way I saw my parents constantly choose each other, and how I wouldn't have been, my activism doesn't exist without my parents' story. because I'm born from an interracial and an interfaith family where I constantly saw my parents choose each other in a time when they had me 8 years into post-apartheid South Africa. It's not a time when the country was prepared to see a Black Indian Muslim couple, right? Or a Black Indian Muslim Christian couple, right? And I saw them constantly choose each other and fight for each other. My upbringing is one of the reasons why I chose to focus on anti-racism, why doing the unfinished work on race in my country is so important to me, because I grew up in a time when people think that because I grew up and I was born and raised in post-apartheid South Africa that racism was buried. No, it wasn't. It just became institutionalized and became systemic and also economic as well. So it doesn't mean that it was totally buried and now a person like me could just walk around and everyone is so welcoming of you. That wasn't the reality of my childhood. And so I had one sister. I'm not really from a huge family. I have an older sister. I'm the last born. I'm the last born.
The spoiled.
Growing up, I was like a daddy's girl, like my dad's princess. I started reading from the age of 4. By the time I was like 6, I was a fluent reader. And the material I had at home to read was newspapers and things that showed the current affairs of the country and the environment around me. And I became very socially aware from a very young age. I knew what was going on. I knew what racism was. I was able to pick up what certain things were and the fact that they were wrong and why they're wrong. And yeah, I was also I was a nerdy kid. I spent most of my time reading, and I was hardly like ever a social butterfly or anything like that. I spent most of my time reading. I probably had like one friend when I was like a kid. I grew up having been rejected by my paternal side because of the Blackness that exists in me, and because my paternal side is a conservative Muslim Indian family, and I never could ever fit in with them. And they treated me as though I was someone who ruined their bloodline. And I was rejected from a very young age. And that was like my first experience of experiencing racism, was being rejected by my own one side of my family. And so I grew up with my dad and my maternal side.
So in the South African context, you would be perceived as colored.
That's quite a debate, actually, because I identify as Black. Mm-hmm. That's how I've been taught to identify from a young age. I've been taught to identify as Black. I can't identify as Indian, right? And I think this just even shows how much there's unfinished work in South Africa. The fact that we still have to have conversations on what category you fit into and how to identify. I could never identify as Indian as a kid. That was a no-brainer. I could never tick that box. And if ever that box was ticked for me, it was back and forth debates. Oh, look at her hair. Look at her skin. Look at her nose. She's not Indian enough. And then the reason why there was constantly a debate between Black or colored is historically, colored people also have formed their own identity and their own culture. So to colored people, you're not colored, you're mixed race. You're not colored because you're not part of the cultural identity they have formed over the years. Because remember that the category of colored came to exist through the history of Cape Malay slaves, then coming into after when colonial settlers arrived and they found Khoisan people, San people, and then there was the genocide no one ever wants to talk about, the mass killing of them, and most people were forced to identify as colored and not identify as African. And then there was under the apartheid regime, mixed race people at the time had to identify as colored. And over time, they formed their own cultural identity where I can't classify as colored because to colored people, you're not part of our cultural identity. You're not part of the ancestral history that we have that has formed our cultural identity. And therefore, you can't fit in with us. And your basis of wanting to fit in cannot be because of the shade of your skin tone, you know? Because I think that this debate existed because people would say, no, because of how light-skinned you are, you should be classified as something else, right? But I didn't fit into that classification that everyone wanted to push me into. And so as it stands, I identify as Black, and that's how I've been taught to identify as by my parents as a child. By my mother, I've been taught to identify in that way. And this is because my paternal classification has rejected me. I can't fit in.
That was definitely one of the things. First time I visited South Africa, I think 2013, was just eye-opening to me, because even the word colored, you know, has a different connotation in different countries and parts of the world. So yeah, when I heard in South Africa, and then the categorization and the fine line, you know, between the shades of colors, it's pretty complex. Do you think that considering your hair political was part of trying to find that identity between what you were raised as and what society wants to box you in?
I definitely think so. I think that this discussion around classification came from the type of features I have, right? The reason why I can't identify with my paternal classification is because of the features I have, right? That's why I can't fit into that classification. And then now when you talk between the line of difference and the line of separation between Black and colored, the features thing comes up. The reason why colored was even brought up as something for me to potentially classify as is because I was looked at as too light-skinned to classify as Black. Even in that, it's got a bit of colonial mindset in it. I was looked at as too light-skinned, right? Features such as the hair on my arms and my actual hair, the types of adjectives used to describe people's hair that's still the kind of language that people use, that language of oppression. Like how there's a term that's been used a lot when there would be back and forth around my identity is, number one, your hair is not soft and silky enough for you to be Indian, but you classify as Black, you've still got a soft curl pattern, but there's a term in Afrikaans called gross hare, like your hair's gross, it's curly and it's a bit tight. So you can't still be colored because you've got gross hare, as they would say, right? Just that type of language around how to talk about someone's hair and how you politicize someone's hair, that stems from racist colonial history and the language that's been handed to us to describe ourselves by the formerly apartheid regime. And then there was a very popular thing that became called the pencil test, where they'd stick a pencil through your hair. If you shake your head and the pencil does not move, then you must classify as Black. If the pencil slips out your head, then you must classify as colored. And they would then still also use the term gross hare. That's how that term came to exist, you know?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that, because I think that was also one of the things I was absolutely astonished about when I visited Apartheid Museum, the pencil experience. I could see that all of this created a rebel and a protester. And so you went on as a child to protest in school. Tell us a little bit more about that. And then that created the book eventually.
I've always had this little activism fire in me. It just needed to be let out. So growing up, as I started to go through like reaching that pre-teen phase where you're like 11, 12, 13, around there, I started to become more aware of my identity, and I became more self-aware of my identity. And this was because of all these experiences of racism I'd had prior, that I was beginning to understand better. And I was understanding why I had those type of experiences. And I was understanding the kind of language around those experiences and how to like vocalize things and name those things, right? And I was also entering a phase where I was realizing South Africa is not the way our very good PR makes it seem to the rest of the world, like this land of milk and honey, free, Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation. That's not what it is at all. Racism still exists, and it's horrible. It still exists in every facet of our society. It's hard in a country like South Africa to not even talk about race, because in this country, racism exists to a point where it determines your outcome in life. There's nothing in your life that you can pinpoint and ignore race. The type of healthcare you will be afforded is based on your race. Where you will live is based on your race. The kind of opportunities you will have is based on your race. Whether you study further after secondary school is based on your race. Employed or unemployed is also based on your race. The type of schools you go to is based on your race. How much you earn, your tax bracket is based on your race as well. The type of transportation you use as well is based on your race. So at no point in your life can you ignore race. And I was beginning to understand that, because at no point in my life could I ignore race, right? And so growing up, because of my parents' experience with education, my mom is a product of a segregated education system, what was known as the Bantu education system under apartheid. My mom is a product of that. And my dad, being an immigrant, never got the chance to get a formal education, right? So my parents deemed going to formally segregated schools, what would be called white schools, they deemed that as a privilege. And because it was a privilege that was not afforded to them, they saw it as almost like this mark in your life that shows you've kind of like made it. So my sister and I had to go to formally segregated schools, go to schools where it was majority white schools. And the problem is that when these schools were desegregated, because they were built on the basis of exclusion, they were built in the light that one day a Black girl is not going to walk these corridors. These schools were built in the interest of white children only. Their policies are in the interest of white children only. The culture that upholds these institutions is in the interest of white children only, right? So everything about it will exclude you. And no one ever talks about that it's not enough to just open a gate to all races and desegregate a space. It's not enough. You have to look into the policies and the cultures that uphold those spaces, right? You can't just desegregate and leave it like that. So when I got to high school, I went to a girls' school that was built in the early, I think it was 1910, even before apartheid, built under when South Africa was still under British rule. In its culture, it carries that colonial British culture in it, right? It was a segregated school, got desegregated, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. First, they had to allow Indian girls only, then Indian and colored, and then it was fully desegregated, where they then included Black girls. Going into early 2000s, that's when they started to introduce things like a quota, whether in the workplace or whether in schools. Eventually, the school became one where it was a 50-50 split between Black and white, right? But the people that ran the school was still white only, right? So when I got there when in 2016, when still upheld, as always, sprinkle of British culture in it, very an English way of carrying yourself, white English standard of femininity as well. In terms of the management of it and the executive body that ran it was majority white. And it's a public school, so it's crazy. They only had like 6 Black educators in a country that's majority Black. That's very crazy and bizarre. So when I got there, I remember I literally did not think I would experience racism. I don't know why, but shockingly I did, or rather not shockingly, I did have many experiences of racism, many, whether if it was in the way that I got spoken to, how I was treated, opposed to how a white girl would be treated, how I was reprimanded as well, having things said to you like you should be grateful to be here. You're here merely because we had to meet a quota of having a certain number of Black learners. If it wasn't for the quota, you wouldn't be here, you know? Having things like that said to you on a daily basis, right? And the insults and being called with the N-word, being called with the K-word as well, the derogatory language as well. And then one thing I noticed was that it wasn't just only the culture of the school that was racist. The policies, the codes of conduct were racist. There was a hair policy that prohibited afros, dreadlocks, and braids, right? That is racist in its own. How do you prohibit how African hair grows out naturally? And there was rules around how cornrows could look. Cornrows could not be thicker than 1 centimeter, which is crazy because if you go to a salon, no one's going to sit with a ruler and measure your braids as they braid you. And then there was a racist language policy where we weren't allowed to speak any African languages at all, even when we're conversing amongst ourselves. All our conversations have to be in English. I remember the one time, before I knew that that policy existed, I spoke to someone in Vernac and I literally got screamed at to never, and the language that was used was not stop speaking that language, it was stop making those barbaric noises. So it was crazy, right? And I think that I put up with it until I just felt like I'm in an environment where I am being forced to leave my identity and anything that represents my identity at the gate, and upon entrance, assimilate to whiteness and assimilate to the standard of white femininity, right? Or else I'm not welcome here. And I just cannot breathe in an environment like this anymore. I feel like this environment is at war with my identity. And so I happened to find peers of mine that felt the same way. We all had a collective feeling of the fact that this had to change because it's never going to end. And girls that look like us and that are like us, that then come after us, are just going to have the same narrative, and it becomes the cycle constantly, you know? And just also just the mental health trauma that comes with having these experiences every single day was very detrimental to us, and was one of the things that really was at the center of why we felt like things needed to change. Decided that the best way to go about things was have protest action. And this was informed by the fact that it's outlined in the Constitution of South Africa that you have a right to protest when you're unhappy, when an injustice is being done to you. You have the right to protest. You have the right to protest without being shot at or anything. So I think what helped was the fact that I've always just been very informed about laws. So that has always informed everything I do with my activism. And yeah, around the 26th of August, 27th of August, 29th of August, we planned a peaceful protest where the first day we just wore all black and had placards. And the response that we got on that day, which is going to sound so crazy, I know, but the institution responded with hiring additional security, but their additional security was security that was armed. And then we decided to continue with our protest into the second day. The second day we had a peaceful march, and this was with our placards as well. And on the second day, the private additional security team that was hired was armed with guns and dogs. And I remember even saying to someone that was the first time in my life I saw a gun. And it was then on that day when everyone knows the image of me with my hands up in a little X, because we were threatened with arrest, where the security tried to get us to disperse and applied what I call an apartheid tactic by saying, I'm going to count to 3, and on the 3rd count, you should disperse. And if not, we're taking further action. That was literally their words. And I remember during that protest, when we got the threat to disperse and no one dispersed, then they threatened us with arrest by saying to us they're going to have to arrest us. For me, in that moment, I felt like the reason why I took that decision to resist was I thought about it as I have 2 options: to allow for this to continue and just die being silent, and allow for this war with my identity to continue and remain silent, or resist and then see what happens. But either or, there's pros and cons to both. I just need to pick which poison I'm willing to sip. And I decided to pick the latter and choose to resist. And after that, our 3rd day was a social media protest where we started a hashtag, which at the time we didn't even think would go as far as becoming a global hashtag that people know around the world, and it created a global conversation around institutionalized racism. And through this action, we were able to change the policies, able to have one of the first ever inquiries into racism launched at a school, where this was something that in a democratic era was something that had never been done before, an inquiry and an investigation into the racism at the school. Well, the outcomes of it were not the greatest outcomes, but it's the fact that it was the start of something that needed to happen. It even went and influenced a integrated youth development strategy in the country for 2030 that states that by 2030, all public schools should have policies that are anti-racist, and all schools should teach a minimum of 1 Indigenous African language, and hair policies should be anti-racist hair policies. So that was like the beginning of my activism. And since then, it was like I spoke up once, and it was like the bug of speaking up bit me, and I just couldn't stop. Then later in 2021, when I published my first book is a children's book about hair and affirming African identity. I wrote that book because I wanted what was at the heart of what sparked my activism to be documented on a permanent reference for a Black girl years to come, and also just to have a piece of literature that affirms Black Afro identity, and just have a child have a reference that is going to affirm their existence, so that they feel empowered and they feel affirmed in who they are. Just to have that for them, and to have a book I knew I would have needed as a child, and have that for children now.
What a powerful story, Zulaikha. What a powerful story. I think whoever is listening to us, young women out there, there's a question that always ask, how do I take action? How do I get involved? How do I get engaged? I think your story is a testament to that, because you chose your cause, you got informed about it, you were informed on the legal aspect of it, you called in others to join you, and then you took action and you became fearless, because since then, that's like, fear is what holds us back from doing anything. And then once you've done it, you knew it's possible. And you knew how fragile the system is that is trying to make us believe we are the ones who are weak and the system is so strong. And I think, yeah, your story really is a case study for that trajectory. So if you're listening and you are still thinking about how do I take the first step, here is Zulaikha's story. And just to say that you're only 20 now, so inspiring. I wanted to ask you, did you lose anybody because of race or because of your involvement in activism?
Yeah, I did. I lost a couple of people along the way because people don't want to associate with someone who gets called a terrorist, gets called a vigilante, gets called a troublemaker. People don't want to associate with what is deemed as trouble by the system. People have been conditioned to pledge their allegiance to a system that doesn't even serve them. And people have been taught that the system is serving them well, and that's what they've been conditioned to think. My parents started being viewed in a different way. They would be called names as well, be told things like they're inadequate, they didn't raise me well. My dad at mosque would be told things of, you need to tell your daughter to learn to be respectful and learn how to uphold what the Quran says, according to them, what the Quran says, even though we both know that is not in the Quran. What the Quran says, how a young girl should behave, how a young lady should behave. You need to teach her to behave well because she's doing haram things. My dad would be looked down on at mosque. My mom at work would also be told a lot of things. Losing people was not something that affected me only, but it affected people who were close to me. And it affected anyone who even tried to get close to me. One of the things I don't even talk about a lot was just after everything that happened in 2016, what happened after, and how my life turned out to be afterwards. Remaining in the same institution I decided to go against so that I could finish my high school education there. It was a really traumatic experience because I was isolated from everyone. So it did kind of affect me, but until I decided to just choose the people that choose me and not stress myself so much to try and associate with people who aren't going to understand, where I'm going to have to just over explain myself and justify certain things. Just choose to associate with people who understand these things and socialize and mingle in spaces where I would be understood. Really helped me. And also those were the years where I call them the formative years of my feminism, because that was when I started meeting a lot of feminists who I think that I just survived that really hard period in my life because of the feminists I knew at the time, who were there to always, like, when I needed a shoulder to cry on, gave me a shoulder to cry on. When I needed an ear to vent to, listened to me and supported me and made me feel supported and protected as well, which is why I don't downplay the impact you as a woman could have in the lives of other women around you and how you choose to treat those women around you. I don't downplay that at all, because I know what other women have done for me. I've had women literally carry me through very hard years of my life, which is why even then, losing people is a common thing when you become an activist and you choose to speak up against a system that is centuries older than you, and has been sustained for so long. You lose people, but that shouldn't be the important thing. The important thing should be, who do you choose to be around, and where do you choose to mingle and socialize, right? Outside of family, outside of friendships, who are the people you're around, you know?
I think that's a great lesson, because it's not even losing people. I think you are attracting the people that will support your struggle and getting rid of those who wouldn't. And I think that's an extremely important lesson, because some people also get stuck in that period and hold on to the people they know and feel comfortable around. So it's, I think, your message of being brave to just, get out there and attract the feminists, in your case, the feminists who were of a great support to you. So in Nairobi, we were together, and you were sharing also a lot about your anti-racism activism. And after you honored my invitation to join NALA Council, I want you to tell us a little bit more about your experience, because we were talking about feminists who have been part of your support system. And now that you joined more of a Pan-African collective, not just South Africa, what was the experience around feminists from all over the continent? how did you feel the impact also of your ideas around that space, and any other things you want to share with us?
I absolutely love NALA as an organization. I think it's the organization we've been waiting for as young African women. So coming into NALA was really empowering to, outside of race lines, be around Pan-African feminists, feminists from the very same continent as me, the continent that just keeps being exploited and left behind. So we have a common African struggle, right? So just having feminists around me where we share a collective struggle for not just African independence, but African women's independence was really empowering for me. And that was like my first favorite thing. And most of the feminists I was around in during our retreat were people I've known of for some time, you know. Before you knew me, I knew you. I knew of you. Obviously through like in certain spaces, people are mentioned, or sometimes you happen to be in the same space as someone, but you can't really walk up to them and have a conversation, possibly because shyness just overcomes and you can't really walk up to them and have a conversation. But it was really great to be around, especially like, for example, Aisha and Olu. I knew of them, and like I was just one of those sisters on social media that was, you know, standing with them in solidarity, especially in 2020 during the NSARS movement. So it was a really good experience to meet with like-minded people and people who get the things that other people don't get, and get things like, yes, using your voice is great and all, but it's not as glamorous as it seems. It takes a toll on you mentally, physically. And those are things that people on the outside will never understand, but people will constantly keep pushing you onto this pedestal to just be the savior for everyone. And it felt so good to be around people that understood those things, right? And it was just about us bringing each other up. And that for me was a really great experience, you know.
And you're doing amazing in championing the manifesto demand on ending gender discrimination, and we also stand in solidarity with you. And with South Africa, it's a tough time. I've been following your social media updates, and it hasn't been easy the past few months. Since you mentioned about mental health, I want to move on to ask a little bit about what's Zuleyha's typical day look like? What is your kind of daily routine? Do you have a morning ritual, an evening ritual? And how do you take care of yourself as well? Like, what would be your weekend self-care routine?
So I think we should talk about a normal day where I'm not committed to anything or engaged in anything. A normal day where I'm waking up in my own space. I'm not like in a different country or just somewhere else in the country. I'm an early riser. I believe firmly in the fact that that saying early bird catches the worm first. Yeah, and also I was raised by my father, who is an entrepreneur. So when you're being raised by someone that's an entrepreneur, you hear things like a person who can't wake up in the morning can't be trusted with anything. So I'm an early riser, a really early riser. I'm usually up between 6 and 6:30. I can't do the 5 a.m. club. The first thing I'll do is I lie in bed for like a good 20 minutes. I just do a normal just breathing exercise and just calm myself. And the first thing I do is I'll then take a shower or take a bath and get a diary, put out my objectives for the day, what I want to get done. I actually do my to-do list into threes: what I need to get done, what I hope to get done, and what I have to get done as the most important one. Then I'll lay that out, and once I've laid that out, I like make myself a cup of tea. Very relaxed morning. I don't believe in like still bustle, running around like a headless chicken in the morning. I have very relaxed mornings. I'll make myself a cup of tea, sit, drink it, relaxed. I also will maybe light a candle or light some incense sticks, just to get something that's calming around me, like a calming scent. And then before I start to get anything done in my to-do list, I first pray, because I think that one of the biggest parts of self-care for me is being connected to my spirituality. And I'll first pray. And then once I've prayed, then I feel like that's when I can properly start my day.
Did you choose your dad's religion, mom's religion, or you chose your own path?
So that's interesting, right? Growing up, my mom no longer practiced her own religion. My mom converted to Islam. So I grew up with a Islamic upbringing, but along the way, I questioned certain things, and I also didn't grow up in a very religious household. I didn't at all, you know. That's why the only time you can ever really see me wear like a hijab is if I go to mosque. And to tell you the truth, I only go to mosque like twice a year on like Eid. I do still carry my Islamic beliefs, but I'm not very religious. So I also then do have another side of where I'm quite a spiritual person as well, where I believe in listening to intuition. Like intuition is your guiding compass through life. You have to listen to your intuition, trust your intuition, because it sends you signs of things that are happening around you, and believing in the fact that things happen for a reason. Yeah, I'm like Muslim, but not very religious, but like Muslim and spiritually aware, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think the word in general, I mean, I'm observing, I'm not sure if I'm attracting these people around me all the time, but the word is more and more spiritually awake, and moving beyond religion and talking more about, I think, spirituality and faith rather than religion. I don't know if it's generational, because also like pre-colonial Africa was very spiritual. But that's, I think I definitely resonate with what you shared. So do you have a favorite song or a dance that you go to when you're most frustrated and you just want to bring joy and you don't want anybody to ruin your day?
I'm not a good dancer, so I don't really dance, but
Oh,
also with music,
you're South
I
African.
wouldn't.
I'm a piano, like the word is crazy about you.
I do listen, but I listen to Amapiano if we're in the setup where, if we're in an establishment where Amapiano is being played and there's a DJ, and you know, that's when I listen to it. But I can't say I'll like sit indoors right now and be in my home and play Amapiano. Like, it's weird, you know. It's one of those things you can't listen to it when you're alone. You have to be in an establishment where there's lots of people and
You need the
their
vibe.
vibe is there. You know, it's strange if you listen to it alone. But also, I wouldn't listen to music if I'm frustrated, because I feel like the music I would listen to when I'm alone, like my music taste is very soul R&B, and some of those soul R&B people and their lyrics are triggering if you're frustrated. So I wouldn't hit to music. I would, like, honestly speaking, when I feel like I just need to take like a few minutes out and just get myself to laugh, I really will just go on TikTok or Instagram and look at memes. That's it, if I'm being entirely honest.
You should send us some of these memes on the council group.
I was sharing my stickers at the time, my sticker reactions, and everyone was laughing.
That is hilarious. So my last question is really maybe a tip or an advice that you can share with young feminists or young women, or probably something you want to share with your younger self.
I think that a parting word of advice for me that I don't think we emphasize enough and this is also because I've looked at recent experiences, is to always choose yourself and be in control of your destiny and your life. If you can master being in control and always choosing yourself, it saves you from a lot of things. And just always try to be in control and be at the steering wheel and choose you all the time. Because I think that as women, we're from a very early age taught and conditioned to not choose ourselves before anyone else. We're taught to choose other people first. We're taught to like nurture other people first before we nurture ourselves. I'm glad that I've learned choosing myself now in my early 20s. I think it's going to save me a whole lot of stress. But I feel like that's the one thing I would really like to emphasize, because honestly speaking, you only see women doing that later in life. And that's like after living a very long and draining life of choosing other people and making other people your priority before you make yourself your own priority. So that would be my parting word of advice.
Choose you. That is very true. And I think be around people like Zuleyha if you aren't self-aware yet, because I think if I were your age in my 20s, I would be around you to just elevate my own self-consciousness as well. So which language you speak, Zuleyha? Or languages, because I know South Africans speak so many languages.
So my home language is isiNdebele. I speak Zulu as well, because Zulu and isiNdebele are very close. It's like cousin languages. Yeah, and then it's not a language, but it's a dialect that exists in Pretoria called Spitori, because Pretoria's nickname is Pitori. So that I also, here and there, I will kick in a sentence or two of it. It's like more of a slang that takes from different languages and stuff. And that's because I grew up in Pretoria.
Okay, so I want you to say I am Nala because in one of these languages of your choice.
Okay.
I'm not gonna be responsible for Praetorians saying you're not choosing our languages. It's your hometown, so you choose. I'm not getting involved with that.
I am gonna just say it in my home language. Okay. In isiNdebele, we're gonna say I am Nala because I'm not afraid and I don't want women to be afraid. Ngingunala ngoba angisabi futhi angifuni ukuthi abafazi basabe.
Amazing.
And if we're saying we're fearless, we are Nala because we're fearless, we then say singunala ngoba sinavalo.
I love it. You know, I'm used to listen to Zulu when I go to South Africa, but this is different and it's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I need to teach you a bit because you're coming back again.
Yes, I'm gonna see you very soon. I want to thank you so much, Zuleyha, for being a light in this world. You are listening to I Am Nala podcast. To learn more about our council and manifesto, check out nalafem.org and nalafem across social media. We will also put Zuleyha's social media on this episode, and I'll see you in the next episode. Oh my God, I had a question and I missed it. So I had a question. Are you a heartbreaker or heartbroken? Oh, this is timely. This is timely. Let's go.
That's a very triggering question. This is a triggering question based on the fact that my breakup was like last week. Am I a heartbreaker or am I heartbroken? In this context of that previous relationship, I would say I was heartbroken, and I'm not a heartbreaker, even though he thinks I'm some kind of heartbreaker because I chose to break up. Because that's just like what men do. They like make you a fool, and then when you decide to stop being a fool, now they play victim. Yeah, I would say in that context, I was heartbroken.
I'm sorry for him.
See, the thing is, I left that relationship mentally a while ago. So we just needed to get to that stage where we had to have that conversation of, this isn't working anymore.
That's even a great reason to go party when I see you and celebrate with Emma and you know, we're gonna celebrate. Because now you're closer to find the person for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, since you got rid of that one, so bye. Crazy. Maybe your next boyfriend will be from Ghana and you have to move there. You never know. Okay, love. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.